At 2,347 meters, with tears streaming down her face and her scope completely fogged, Staff Sergeant Rebecca Thompson had exactly 3 seconds before the convoy would disappear around the mountain bend. The male rangers had always mocked her for being too emotional for the job. They said real snipers don't feel anything, don't let feelings interfere with the mission. But in that moment, with her vision blurred and her hands trembling from grief, Rebecca was about to prove that sometimes the heart makes the impossible shot that cold calculation never could. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first snowfall had arrived early in the mountains of northern Idaho, dusting the pine trees with a thin layer of white that reminded Rebecca Thompson of her grandmother's powdered sugar cookies. At 28, she had been hunting these same mountains since she was 7 years old, but she had never imagined that her childhood hobby would lead her here, lying prone in the freezing dirt of Fort Benning, Georgia, as Drill Sergeant Marcus Crawford screamed inches from her ear. "Thompson, you think this is some kind of summer camp? You think the enemy is going to wait while you wipe your nose and fix your makeup?" Rebecca kept her breathing steady, her cheek pressed against the stock of her rifle, crosshairs centered on a target 800 meters downrange. The other recruits in her advanced marksmanship course had stopped what they were doing to watch. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to crack under the pressure. It wouldn't be the first time they'd seen someone wash out of sniper training. "I asked you a question, recruit." "No, Drill Sergeant," Rebecca replied calmly, never taking her eye from the scope. "But I also don't think the enemy is going to stand still while I take my time." She squeezed the trigger, the bullet struck dead center, and the steel target rang out across the range like a bell. Crawford walked over to examine the target through his binoculars, his expression unreadable. When he returned, he leaned down close to Rebecca's ear. "Lucky shot," he muttered, just loud enough for the other recruits to hear. "Let's see you do it again." What Crawford didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Rebecca had been making shots like that since she was 12 years old. Growing up in the rural logging town of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, she had learned to shoot from her father, David Thompson, a Vietnam veteran who worked at the local sawmill. But her real teacher had been her grandfather, Samuel Thompson, a World War II veteran who had served as a Marine sniper in the Pacific Theater. Every weekend, while other girls her age were at sleepovers or shopping at the mall, Rebecca would hike into the mountains with her grandfather. He taught her to read the wind by watching the way grass bent and leaves rustled. He showed her how to calculate bullet drop over long distances, how to control her breathing, and most importantly, how to find that moment of perfect stillness between heartbeats when the shot becomes inevitable. "Shooting isn't about the gun," he would tell her as they sat on a ridge overlooking the valley below. "It's about understanding yourself, your breathing, your heartbeat, your emotions. A good sniper doesn't eliminate feelings, they use them." It was an unusual philosophy for a military marksman, but Samuel Thompson had learned it the hard way during 18 months of island hopping in the Pacific. He had seen too many good shooters fail when the pressure mounted, their technical skills useless against the chaos of their own emotions. The snipers who survived, he discovered, were the ones who could harness their feelings rather than suppress them. Rebecca's mother, Linda, had never understood her daughter's fascination with firearms. A nurse at the local hospital, she had seen too much of what bullets could do to human bodies. But she also recognized something in Rebecca that others missed: a deep sense of responsibility and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. When Rebecca was 16, a search and rescue operation in the mountains had gone wrong. A group of hikers had become lost in a sudden blizzard, and the volunteer search teams couldn't reach them before hypothermia set in. Rebecca had volunteered to guide the rescue team through terrain she knew better than anyone, navigating by landmarks invisible to others and leading them through mountain passes that weren't on any map. They found the hikers just in time, but what impressed the rescue coordinator most wasn't Rebecca's navigation skills, it was her composure. While seasoned adults were panicking about the deteriorating weather conditions, this teenage girl had remained focused and methodical, making life-or-death decisions with the clarity of someone much older. That incident had planted the seed of an idea in Rebecca's mind. She began to consider a career in the military, specifically in roles where her unique skills could save lives. Her high school guidance counselor had suggested she consider college first, maybe pursue a degree in forestry or environmental science. But Rebecca knew what she wanted to do. 3 months after her 18th birthday, she walked into the Army recruitment office in Spokane, Washington. The recruiting sergeant, Staff Sergeant Kevin Mills, looked up from his paperwork with barely concealed skepticism. "Let me guess," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You want to be a mechanic, or maybe work in communications, something nice and safe." "I want to be a sniper," Rebecca replied without hesitation. Mills laughed out loud. "Honey, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but sniper training is, well, it's not really for..." "For women?" Rebecca finished for him. "For most people," Mills corrected, though his tone suggested he meant exactly what Rebecca thought he meant. "The physical demands alone are enormous. Then there's the psychological pressure. Most men can't handle it." Rebecca reached into her backpack and pulled out a folder containing photographs and documentation from various shooting competitions she had won throughout high school. Her scores from state championships, her certification as a hunting guide, and testimonials from local law enforcement officers who had witnessed her abilities. Mills flipped through the documents, his expression gradually shifting from amusement to surprise to genuine interest. One photograph showed Rebecca at a 1,000-yard shooting competition, surrounded by men twice her age, holding a first-place trophy. Another showed her teaching a firearms safety course to other teenagers, demonstrating proper technique with the confidence of a seasoned instructor. "These scores," Mills said, looking up at her with new respect, "are these legitimate?" "Call the competition organizers if you want to verify them," Rebecca replied. "I've been shooting competitively for 6 years. I've never placed lower than third in any competition I've entered, and I've never missed a shot that counted." Mills set the folder down and studied Rebecca more carefully. She wasn't particularly tall or physically imposing, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet confidence that couldn't be faked. He had seen thousands of recruits over his 15-year career, and he had learned to recognize the difference between bravado and genuine capability. "All right," he said finally, "I'll put you down for infantry with a note about your marksmanship background. But understand something. Wanting to be a sniper and actually becoming one are two very different things. The training is brutal, and the washout rate is over 70%. Most people who think they want this job change their minds pretty quickly." Rebecca nodded. "I understand, Sergeant, but I'm not like most people." 8 weeks later, she graduated from basic training at Fort Moore with the highest marksmanship scores in her company. Her drill sergeants had initially treated her with the same skepticism she had encountered at the recruitment office, but her performance had quickly silenced the doubters. She could disassemble and reassemble her rifle faster than anyone in her unit. Her shot groups were consistently tighter than those of recruits who had been shooting their entire lives, and she displayed an almost uncanny ability to remain calm under the intense pressure of military training. But it was during advanced individual training that Rebecca truly began to stand out. While other soldiers struggled with the technical aspects of long-range shooting, wind calculation, bullet trajectory, range estimation, Rebecca seemed to absorb the concepts intuitively. Her instructors noted that she rarely needed corrections, and when she did miss a target, she could usually identify the error herself and adjust accordingly. The real test came during her final evaluation, a complex scenario designed to simulate combat conditions. Students were required to engage multiple targets at varying distances while under simulated enemy fire, complete their mission within a strict time limit, and demonstrate tactical movement between shooting positions. Rebecca had drawn the most challenging scenario, 7 targets at distances ranging from 400 to 1,200 meters, with only 10 minutes to complete the course. As she settled into her first firing position, she could hear her instructors discussing her chances over the radio. "Thompson's got the hardest draw," one of them said. "Those are some tough shots, especially with the time pressure." "We'll see what she's made of," another replied. "Talk is cheap. Performance is what counts." Rebecca turned out the chatter and focused on her first target, a silhouette positioned 847 meters away behind partial concealment. The wind was gusting unpredictably, and she could see heat shimmer rising from the valley floor. She took a deep breath, felt the rhythm of her heartbeat, and found that moment of perfect stillness her grandfather had taught her to recognize. The first shot was perfect. The target dropped, and Rebecca was already moving to her next position before her instructors had confirmed the hit. She worked through the course methodically, each shot deliberate and precise. When she engaged the final target, a small silhouette at 1,186 meters, she had 3 minutes remaining on the clock. The shot was the most challenging of her military career to that point, requiring her to account for a significant crosswind and an elevation change that would affect bullet trajectory. She settled into her firing position, made her calculations, and prepared to fire. Just as she was about to squeeze the trigger, a memory flashed through her mind, her grandfather's voice on a hunting trip years earlier. "The rifle knows when you're ready, Becca. Don't force the shot. Let it happen." She relaxed her grip slightly, let her breathing settle, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the target dead center, and the range fell silent. When the scores were tallied, Rebecca had achieved a perfect score, the first student in the program's history to hit every target within the time limit. Her instructors were impressed, but more importantly, she had proven to herself that she belonged in this profession. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, as she cleaned her rifle in the barracks, Rebecca thought about the path that had brought her here. From those early hunting trips with her grandfather to this moment, she had never doubted her calling. She had known since she was 12 years old that she wanted to use her skills to protect people, to make a difference in situations where others couldn't. But she also knew that the real challenges lay ahead. Military training was one thing, combat was something else entirely. Soon she would be tested not just on her technical abilities, but on her capacity to make life-and-death decisions under pressure that she couldn't even imagine yet. As she drifted off to sleep, Rebecca remembered something else her grandfather had told her. "The hardest shots aren't the long ones, Becca. They're the ones where everything you care about is on the line." She was about to discover just how prophetic those words would prove to be. The C-130 transport plane shuddered through turbulence as it descended toward Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Rebecca Thompson pressed her face against the small window, watching the barren mountains and desert landscape roll by below. After 2 years of advanced training and specialized schools, she was finally heading to her first combat deployment with the 75th Ranger Regiment's elite sniper section. But the reception waiting for her at Bagram would prove more hostile than any enemy fire. Sergeant First Class Marcus Stone looked up from his equipment maintenance when Rebecca walked into the team room carrying her deployment bags. At 34, Stone was a 12-year veteran with 3 combat tours and a reputation as one of the Army's most skilled snipers. His weathered face showed no emotion as he watched Rebecca find an empty bunk and begin organizing her gear. "So you're the replacement," Stone said, not bothering to stand or offer a greeting. "I heard they were sending us someone from the schoolhouse. Didn't know they were scraping the bottom of the barrel." Rebecca continued unpacking, choosing not to respond to the obvious provocation. She had dealt with skepticism throughout her military career, but she sensed something different here, a deeper hostility that went beyond simple doubt about her abilities. Staff Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez, Stone's spotter and closest friend, looked up from cleaning his rifle. "Marcus, maybe we should give her a chance before we—" "Before we what?" Stone interrupted. "Before we get someone killed because the Army decided to run a social experiment? This isn't training, Rodriguez. This is the real deal." The team room fell silent. 2 other Rangers, Specialists Andrew Carter and Miguel Santos, exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. Rebecca could feel the tension in the air, thick as smoke. "Is there a problem, Sergeant Stone?" Rebecca asked quietly, finally turning to face him. Stone stood up slowly, his 6'3" frame towering over Rebecca's 5'6" build. "Yeah, there's a problem. The problem is that snipers can't afford to be emotional. We can't afford to hesitate when it matters. And women, no offense, are wired differently. You feel things too much. You get attached to people, you second-guess yourself, you let your feelings interfere with your judgment. With respect, Sergeant, you don't know anything about how I'm wired." Stone laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I know enough. I know that when things get ugly out there, and they will get ugly, you're going to freeze up. You're going to start crying, or panicking, or whatever it is women do when the pressure gets real. And when that happens, people die." Rebecca felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice level. "I've never frozen up. Not once in training, not in any situation I've been in." "Training," Stone repeated mockingly. "You think those pop-up targets and fake scenarios prepared you for what we do here? You think shooting paper bullseyes is the same as putting a bullet through someone's head while their family watches? This isn't a competition, sweetheart. This is war." The contempt in his voice was unmistakable, and Rebecca realized this wasn't just about her gender or her inexperience. Stone genuinely believed that emotional capacity was a fatal weakness in a sniper, and in his mind, women were inherently too emotional for the job. Over the following days, Stone made his position clear through a series of subtle but unmistakable acts of exclusion. He would discuss mission planning with the other team members while Rebecca was present, but would speak as if she wasn't there. He would assign her menial tasks, equipment maintenance, report writing, administrative duties, while the others conducted advanced training exercises. When Rebecca requested to participate in a long-range shooting exercise, Stone denied the request. "You need to focus on the basics first. Learn how things work around here before you start trying to show off." The breaking point came during a team meeting 3 weeks into her deployment. Intelligence had identified a high-value target in the Wardak province, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces. The mission would require a long-range shot in challenging terrain, exactly the kind of operation Rebecca had trained for. "Rodriguez and I will take the primary position," Stone announced, spreading a map across the table. "Carter, you and Santos will provide security and communications support." Rebecca looked at the map, studying the terrain features and calculating distances. The target compound was situated in a valley surrounded by ridgelines that offered multiple shooting positions. "Sergeant Stone, if I could make a suggestion about the approach." "Thompson," Stone cut her off, "you're not going on this mission. You'll stay here and monitor communications." The room fell silent again. Rebecca could see the other Rangers looking uncomfortable with Stone's decision, but none of them were willing to challenge their team leader directly. "Why?" Rebecca asked simply. Stone turned to face her, his expression hard. "Because this mission requires absolute precision and emotional control. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and the target escapes or our position gets compromised. I can't risk that with someone who might start crying when things get intense." The comment hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She had never shown any emotional instability during training or deployment preparation. Stone's assumption was based purely on his prejudices about women in combat roles. "I have never shown any signs of emotional instability," Rebecca said, struggling to keep her voice calm. "My training scores are higher than anyone else on this team. I have never missed a qualification or failed any evaluation." "Training scores don't mean anything out here," Stone replied. "What matters is what happens when someone is shooting back at you. When you can see the terror in your target's eyes. When you have to make a split-second decision that determines whether your teammates go home alive. Women aren't built for that kind of pressure." Rodriguez finally spoke up. "Marcus, maybe we should give her a chance to prove herself. Her scores really are impressive. And—" "My decision is final," Stone said firmly. "Thompson stays behind." That night, Rebecca sat alone in the team room, cleaning her rifle and thinking about her grandfather's words. He had never told her that being a sniper meant eliminating emotions. Quite the opposite. He had taught her that emotions, properly channeled, could enhance performance rather than hinder it. She thought about her training instructors, many of whom had been combat veterans themselves. They had emphasized technical skills and tactical knowledge, but they had also taught her about the psychological aspects of the job. Good snipers, they had explained, weren't emotionless machines. They were individuals who could maintain their humanity while performing an inhuman task. The next morning, Stone and Rodriguez departed for their mission while Rebecca remained at the base, monitoring radio communications and feeling frustrated beyond measure. She listened as they moved into position, established their hide site, and waited for the target to appear. "Target acquired," came Stone's voice over the radio several hours later. "Preparing to engage." Rebecca held her breath, waiting for the shot. But then she heard something unexpected in Stone's voice. Uncertainty. "Target is moving. Negative. I don't have a clear shot. Too much civilian traffic in the area." For the next 4 hours, Rebecca listened as Stone and Rodriguez waited for a clear shot that never came. The target eventually left the compound under heavy security. The mission ended in failure, and the team returned to base empty-handed. "Sometimes that's how it goes," Stone said during the debrief, but Rebecca could see the frustration in his eyes. Better to let him go than risk civilian casualties. Rebecca nodded, but privately she wondered if Stone's rigid adherence to purely technical considerations had caused him to miss opportunities that a more intuitive approach might have revealed. Her grandfather had taught her that successful sniping required more than just technical precision. It required the ability to read human behavior, to anticipate movement patterns, to understand the emotional rhythms of a target's daily life. Over the following weeks, Rebecca found herself increasingly isolated from the team's operational activities. She was treated as a support person rather than a full team member, handling logistics and communications while the others conducted the actual missions. The pattern was becoming clear. Stone had decided she was a liability before she had even had a chance to prove herself. But Rebecca also noticed something else. During mission briefings, when Stone thought she wasn't paying attention, she would catch glimpses of uncertainty in his decision-making. He was an excellent technical shooter, but his rigid approach sometimes led him to overlook tactical opportunities or misread the human elements of a situation. She began to realize that Stone's resistance to emotional intelligence in sniping wasn't just prejudice against women, it was a fundamental philosophical difference about what made an effective sniper. He believed that feelings were weak. Rebecca had been taught that feelings, properly understood and controlled, were a source of strength. The question was whether she would ever get the chance to prove it. Late one evening, as Rebecca sat alone writing a letter to her family back in Idaho, Rodriguez approached her bunk. He glanced around to make sure Stone wasn't within earshot, then sat down beside her. "Thompson," he said quietly, "I want you to know that not all of us agree with how you're being treated. You've shown nothing but professionalism since you got here, and your technical skills are obviously solid." Rebecca looked up from her letter. "Thank you, Sergeant Rodriguez, that means a lot." "Marcus is a good soldier and a hell of a sniper," Rodriguez continued, "but he's got some blind spots. He thinks that caring about the mission means not caring about anything else. Sometimes I think he's afraid that if he lets himself feel anything, he won't be able to do the job." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "My grandfather used to say that the best snipers are the ones who understand that they're still human, even when they have to do inhuman things." Rodriguez smiled slightly. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. Maybe someday Marcus will figure that out too." As Rodriguez walked away, Rebecca returned to her letter, but her mind was elsewhere. She was beginning to understand that her real challenge wouldn't be proving she could shoot accurately or remain calm under pressure. Her challenge would be proving that emotional intelligence wasn't a weakness. It was exactly what made a sniper truly effective. She just needed someone to give her the chance to prove it. The memorial service was held at dawn, when the Afghan sun painted the mountains surrounding Bagram Airfield in shades of gold and crimson. Staff Sergeant Rebecca Thompson stood in formation with the rest of the 75th Ranger Regiment, watching as 6 flag-draped coffins were loaded onto a transport plane bound for Dover Air Force Base. One of those coffins contained the body of Specialist Miguel Santos, the youngest member of their sniper team. He had been killed 3 days earlier during a Taliban ambush that could have been prevented, if anyone had been willing to listen to Rebecca's intelligence analysis. As the ceremony concluded and the formation dispersed, Rebecca felt the familiar ache of frustrated helplessness that had become her constant companion over the past 2 months. She had been in Afghanistan for 8 weeks now, and despite her extensive training and proven abilities, she had yet to fire a single shot in combat. Sergeant Stone continued to exclude her from operational missions, relegating her to administrative duties and base security. But Santos's death had changed everything. For the first time since her arrival, the other team members were beginning to question Stone's leadership decisions. The mission had started routinely enough. Intelligence reports indicated that a Taliban weapons cache was hidden in a village 12 kilometers north of their forward operating base. Stone had planned a reconnaissance mission to locate and assess the cache before calling in an airstrike to destroy it. Rebecca had spent hours analyzing satellite imagery and local intelligence reports, identifying patterns in the village's daily routines that suggested the optimal time for surveillance. She had noticed that every Tuesday and Thursday the village's male population would gather at the local mosque for extended prayer sessions, leaving the streets unusually empty. This would provide perfect conditions for the reconnaissance team to observe the suspected cache location without being detected. When Rebecca presented her analysis to Stone, he had dismissed it without consideration. "Thompson, we don't need you to tell us how to read intelligence reports. Rodriguez and I have been doing this since before you knew what a rifle was. Sergeant, if you look at the pattern of movement around the suspected building, you can see that. I said we don't need your input, Stone had cut her off. Stick to what you know. Paperwork and radio duty. Instead of following Rebecca's recommendations, Stone had planned the mission for a Wednesday morning, when the village would be at its busiest. His reasoning was that the increased activity would provide better concealment for their observation post, but Rebecca knew he was wrong. The busy streets would make it nearly impossible to distinguish between normal civilian activity and potential threats. The mission had gone wrong from the start. Stone and Rodriguez had established their observation post on a rooftop overlooking the village center, but the heavy foot traffic below made it difficult to maintain surveillance on their target building. Santos and Carter had been positioned in a nearby alley to provide security and communications support. What none of them had anticipated was that their presence had been detected by Taliban spotters who had been specifically watching for American reconnaissance teams. The insurgents had allowed Stone's team to settle into their positions before springing their trap. The ambush had been devastating. Santos was killed instantly by sniper fire, and Carter was severely wounded in the initial assault. Stone and Rodriguez found themselves pinned down on the rooftop with no clear escape route, calling desperately for air support while Taliban fighters closed in from multiple directions. The quick reaction force that eventually rescued them had been forced to level half the village block to suppress the enemy fire. 7 civilians were killed in the crossfire, including 2 children. The weapons cache they had come to find was never located. At the after-action review, Rebecca had remained silent while Stone attempted to explain what had gone wrong. He cited bad intelligence, unexpected enemy preparedness, and simple bad luck. He made no mention of his decision to ignore Rebecca's analysis, or the fact that she had correctly predicted the tactical disadvantages of conducting the mission during peak civilian activity. But Rodriguez knew. In the privacy of the team room that evening, he had confronted Stone about his stubborn refusal to consider Rebecca's input. Marcus, she was right about the timing. If we had gone in during one of those prayer sessions like she suggested, Santos might still be alive. Stone's response had been predictably defensive. Don't second-guess my decisions, Rodriguez. Santos died because the enemy got lucky, not because of anything Thompson said or didn't say. That's bullshit and you know it, Rodriguez had shot back. You're so determined to prove that she doesn't belong here that you're putting the whole team at risk. The argument had escalated until Carter, despite his injuries, had intervened from his hospital bed via radio. Both of you need to shut up and figure this out. Santos is dead, I'm probably going home on a medical discharge, and we've got a team that's falling apart. Something has to change. Now standing in the Afghan morning sun, watching Santos's coffin disappear into the transport plane, Rebecca felt the weight of his death settling on her shoulders. She knew that her analysis could have prevented the ambush, but she also knew that Stone would never admit his mistake or change his approach to her role in the team. After the memorial service, Rebecca returned to the team room to find Major Patricia Hayes, the battalion intelligence officer, waiting for her. Hayes was a 15-year veteran who had broken barriers throughout her career, becoming one of the first women to serve in special operations support roles. Thompson, I need to speak with you privately, Hayes said, glancing around the empty room. They walked to Hayes's office, where the major closed the door and gestured for Rebecca to sit down. Hayes's expression was serious but sympathetic. I've been watching the situation with your team, Hayes began. I've also been reviewing your intelligence analyses, including the one you submitted before the Santos mission. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. Ma'am, You were right, Hayes interrupted. Your analysis was spot on. And if Stone had followed your recommendations, that ambush probably never would have happened. Santos would still be alive, and we wouldn't have 7 dead civilians on our conscience. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Hearing someone in authority confirm what she had been thinking made Santos's death feel even more senseless. Ma'am, what am I supposed to do with that information? Rebecca asked quietly. Sergeant Stone has made it clear that he doesn't want my input on operational matters. Hayes leaned forward, her expression intense. Thompson, you have skills that this unit needs, but you're being wasted in your current role. I've been authorized to make you a proposition. Rebecca waited, unsure what to expect. There's a special operations task force being formed to hunt high-value targets in the eastern provinces. They need analysts who can also serve as operational assets, people who can read intelligence, plan missions, and execute them when necessary. It would mean leaving Stone's team and working with a different unit, but it would also mean using your abilities where they can actually make a difference. The offer was tempting, but Rebecca felt conflicted. Leaving Stone's team would feel like giving up, like admitting that she couldn't handle the challenges of working with difficult teammates. But staying meant accepting a role where her skills were wasted and her input was ignored. "Can I ask you something, ma'am?" Rebecca said finally. Hayes nodded. "Do you think there's any chance that Sergeant Stone will change his mind about me? That he'll eventually see that I can contribute to this team?" Quote. Hayes considered the question carefully. "Thompson, I've known Marcus Stone for 6 years. He's a skilled soldier and a dedicated ranger, but he's also stubborn and set in his ways. In his mind, emotions and feelings are weaknesses that have no place in special operations. He genuinely believes that by excluding you from missions, he's protecting the team." "But that's not how emotions work," Rebecca protested. "My grandfather taught me that emotions can enhance performance if you understand how to use them properly. They give you insight into human behavior, help you anticipate how targets will react, allow you to make connections that pure logic might miss." "I know that," Hayes replied. "You know that. But Stone doesn't, and I don't think he ever will. The question is whether you're willing to waste your entire deployment trying to prove something to someone who's already made up his mind." Rebecca thought about Santos, about the civilians who had died, about all the missions where her insights could have made a difference. She thought about her grandfather's teachings and her own dreams of using her skills to save lives, rather than watching helplessly, while others made preventable mistakes. "Ma'am, if I take this assignment, would I be working with people who understand that emotional intelligence is an asset rather than a liability?" Hayes smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "Thompson, you'd be working with people who judge their teammates based on results, not preconceptions. They care about mission success, not proving philosophical points about gender roles or emotional capacity." Rebecca felt something shifting inside her, a resolution crystallizing around a decision she had been avoiding for weeks. Stone would never change his mind about her, and she couldn't save lives by sitting on the sidelines waiting for acceptance that would never come. "When would I need to give you an answer?" "The task force deploys in 72 hours, Hayes replied. "If you're interested, I need to know by tomorrow morning." As Rebecca walked back to the team room, she encountered Rodriguez near the dining facility. He looked tired and older than his 28 years, still processing the loss of his friend and the fractures in his team. "Hey, Thompson," he said quietly. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay, Rodriguez. How about you?" He shrugged. Santos was a good kid. He didn't deserve what happened to him. Quote. They stood in silence for a moment, both thinking about the young ranger who would never see his family again. "Rodriguez," Rebecca said finally, "can I ask you something? Do you really think I don't belong in special operations?" Rodriguez looked at her directly, his expression serious. "Thompson, I think you're probably the most qualified person on our team. I also think Marcus is so afraid of admitting he was wrong about you that he'd rather risk all our lives than give you a chance to prove yourself. What would you do if you were in my position?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long time, considering his answer. "I'd find somewhere that my skills were appreciated instead of wasted. Life's too short to spend it trying to convince people who've already made up their minds." That evening, Rebecca sat in the darkness of her bunk, writing another letter to her family. But this time, instead of describing the frustrations of her deployment, she found herself writing about choices and opportunities, about the difference between perseverance and stubbornness, about knowing when to fight and when to find a different battlefield. By morning, she had made her decision. The next phase of her journey would take her far from Stone's prejudices and into a world where her tears, her emotions, and her humanity would finally be recognized as the weapons they had always been. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Shank just as the sun disappeared behind the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains. Staff Sergeant Rebecca Thompson shouldered her gear and stepped off the aircraft into a world that felt immediately different from Bagram. The base was smaller, more austere, and carried the unmistakable tension of a facility that lived on the edge of enemy territory. Task Force Reaper operated out of a cluster of prefabricated buildings at the far end of the base, away from the conventional units and their predictable routines. As Rebecca approached the designated building, she could hear voices engaged in animated discussion about target packages and operational timelines. Inside, she found herself face-to-face with Captain James Mitchell, the task force commander. At 38, Mitchell had the weathered appearance of someone who had spent most of his adult life in combat zones. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct, and his manner refreshingly free of the skepticism she had grown accustomed to. "Thompson, welcome to Task Force Reaper. Major Hayes speaks very highly of your analytical capabilities and your operational potential. We're glad to have you." The briefing room contained 4 other team members, each representing a different specialty within the Special Operations community. Master Sergeant David Clark was a Green Beret with 18 years of experience in unconventional warfare. Staff Sergeant Lisa Chen was a military intelligence analyst who had spent 3 tours tracking high-value targets across Afghanistan and Iraq. Sergeant First Class Robert Washington was a Navy SEAL sniper, whose reputation for precision was legendary within the Special Operations community. Technical Sergeant Maria Gonzalez was an Air Force combat controller responsible for coordinating close air support and medical evacuations. What struck Rebecca immediately was the team's composition. 3 of the 5 members were women, and Mitchell's introduction made it clear that each person had been selected based purely on their capabilities rather than any demographic considerations. "Before we get into current operations," Mitchell said, settling into his chair, "I want to make something clear about how this unit operates. We don't have time for politics, prejudices, or personal agendas. Our mission is to eliminate high-value targets who pose direct threats to coalition forces and Afghan civilians. We succeed by leveraging every advantage we can find: intelligence, technology, tactical surprise, and most importantly, human insight." He looked directly at Rebecca. "Thompson, Major Hayes tells me that your previous unit had some philosophical differences about the role of emotional intelligence in special operations. I want you to understand that in this team, we consider emotional intelligence to be just as important as marksmanship or tactical knowledge. Understanding human behavior, reading social dynamics, and anticipating psychological responses are critical skills in our line of work." Rebecca felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For the first time in months, she was working with people who valued the full range of her capabilities. Washington, the SEAL sniper, leaned forward. "Thompson, I looked at your training records. Your scores are impressive, but I'm more interested in your approach to target analysis. Hayes mentioned that you have some unconventional methods for predicting target behavior." Rebecca nodded. "My grandfather taught me that successful sniping isn't just about technical precision. It's about understanding the human element. Targets aren't static objects. They're people with habits, emotions, fears, and relationships. If you can understand those psychological factors, you can anticipate their movements and decision-making patterns in ways that pure technical analysis might miss." Chen, the intelligence analyst, looked intrigued. "Can you give us an example?" Rebecca pulled out a folder containing some of her previous work. "During my time at Bagram, I was analyzing the movement patterns of a Taliban commander named Hakim Nazir. Traditional intelligence focused on his operational meetings and strategic communications, but I started paying attention to his personal routines." She spread out several photographs and timeline charts on the table. Nazir had a 7-year-old daughter who was suffering from asthma. Every Thursday, he would personally drive her to a clinic in Kabul for treatment, despite the security risks. The conventional analysis dismissed this as irrelevant personal information, but I realized it represented a predictable vulnerability. Clark studied the charts with professional interest. "You're talking about exploiting parental emotions." "Exactly," Rebecca replied. Nazir was willing to expose himself to significant tactical risk because his emotional attachment to his daughter overrode his security protocols. That emotional decision created a pattern we could exploit. Every Thursday at 1:30 p.m., he would be at that clinic, surrounded by civilians but also predictably located. Mitchell nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Washington, what's your assessment?" The SEAL sniper smiled. "I like it. Most snipers think the hard part is making the shot, but the real challenge is usually getting the target to be where you need them, when you need them there. If Thompson can predict human behavior that reliably, she can create shooting opportunities that other snipers would never see." Gonzalez, the Air Force combat controller, raised a practical question. "Thompson, how do you gather that kind of personal intelligence about targets?" "Most of our information comes from signals, intercepts, and aerial surveillance." "Human sources," Rebecca replied. locals who observe daily routines, family members who understand relationship dynamics, even enemy personnel who might be willing to provide information in exchange for consideration. The key is asking the right questions and understanding that emotional motivations often override tactical logic. Over the following days, Rebecca immersed herself in Task Force Reaper's current operations. Their primary target was a Taliban commander named Abdul Rashid Dostum, who had been responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition convoys throughout the eastern provinces. Dostum was experienced, paranoid, and extremely difficult to locate using conventional intelligence methods. Previous attempts to track Dostum had failed because he maintained strict operational security, rarely used electronic communications, and constantly changed his location. Traditional military intelligence had focused on his strategic activities, meetings with other commanders, weapon shipments, attack planning, but had been unable to establish patterns reliable enough for targeting. Rebecca approached the problem differently. Instead of focusing on Dostum's military activities, she began researching his personal life, family relationships, and emotional vulnerabilities. Through careful analysis of human intelligence reports and local interviews, she discovered that Dostum had a complex web of family obligations that created predictable behavior patterns. The breakthrough came when Rebecca identified Dostum's relationship with his elderly mother, who lived in a small village near Jalalabad. Despite his operational security concerns, Dostum visited his mother every 2 weeks, always on Friday evenings, always staying until Saturday morning prayers. The visits followed a precise routine that had never varied in over a year of observation. More importantly, Rebecca realized that Dostum's emotional attachment to his mother created tactical vulnerabilities that extended beyond the visits themselves. He would only travel to see her when he felt confident about the security situation in the area, which meant his visits could be used as indicators of his operational planning. When Rebecca presented her analysis to the team, Washington was immediately interested in the tactical possibilities. If we can predict when he's going to be at his mother's house, we can establish overwatch positions and wait for him. It's more complex than that, Rebecca explained. The village has heavy civilian traffic, and Dostum always travels with security. But I've identified a stretch of road about 3 kilometers from the village where his convoy has to pass through open terrain. There's a ridgeline about 2,100 meters away that would provide an ideal shooting position. Mitchell studied the satellite imagery Rebecca had prepared. What's the timeline for his next visit? Based on the pattern, he should be making the trip this Friday evening. That gives us 4 days to get into position and prepare. Chen raised a concern. Thompson, what if he's changed his routine? What if family visits are too predictable and he's modified his security procedures? Rebecca had anticipated this question. I've been monitoring local communications and interviewing villagers through our human intelligence network. As of yesterday, his mother was telling neighbors that her son would be visiting her this weekend. The pattern is holding. Clark nodded slowly. It's a good plan, but it's also high risk. If we're wrong about the timing or the route, we could end up sitting on that ridge for days without a target. And if Dostum suspects surveillance, he could disappear for months. That's true, Rebecca acknowledged, but conventional approaches have failed for over a year. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks based on human psychology, rather than playing it safe with technical intelligence. Mitchell made the decision. We'll do it. Thompson, you'll be the primary shooter on this mission. Washington will serve as your spotter and backup. Clark, Chen, and Gonzalez will provide security and support. As the meeting broke up and the team began mission planning, Washington approached Rebecca privately. Thompson, I want you to know that I've never worked with someone who approaches target analysis the way you do. Most snipers, myself included, focus on the mechanical aspects, distance, wind, ballistics. But what you're doing, using emotional intelligence to create tactical opportunities, that's next-level thinking. Rebecca appreciated the validation, but she also felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This would be her first operational shot as a sniper, and she would be attempting it at an extreme range under conditions that would test every skill she had developed over years of training. More importantly, this mission would be her chance to prove that emotional intelligence wasn't a weakness to be overcome. It was a weapon to be wielded with precision and purpose. Friday evening was approaching fast, and with it, The moment when Rebecca Thompson would finally have the opportunity to show what she could accomplish when her tears, her humanity, and her understanding of the human heart were recognized as the tactical advantages they had always been. The question was whether those advantages would be enough to make an impossible shot when everything depended on it. The climb to the overwatch position took 6 hours through terrain that tested every muscle in Rebecca Thompson's body. Moving under the cover of darkness, Task Force Reaper had inserted 12 kilometers from their target area and approached on foot through valleys and ridgelines that existed on no official maps. Each team member carried specialized equipment for the extended surveillance mission, but Rebecca bore the additional weight of knowing that everything depended on her ability to make a shot that pushed beyond the accepted limits of her weapon system. By 0400 hours, they had reached the designated observation point, a rocky outcrop that provided clear lines of sight across the valley, where Abdul Rashid Dostum would theoretically pass in 14 hours. Sergeant First Class Washington immediately began setting up surveillance equipment while Rebecca studied the terrain through her scope, calculating wind patterns and identifying potential complications that could affect her shot. The distance to the target road was 2,347 meters, nearly a mile and a half. At that range, her bullet would take over 3 seconds to reach its target, during which time wind conditions, target movement, and even the rotation of the Earth would affect the trajectory. It was beyond the effective range of her rifle system, beyond what most military snipers would even attempt, and certainly beyond anything she had ever tried in combat. Range confirmed at 2,347 meters, Washington reported, adjusting his high-powered spotting scope. Wind is variable, mostly from the southwest at 8 to 15 miles per hour, but there are some unpredictable gusts coming down from the mountain passes. Rebecca nodded, making notes in her data book while continuing to observe the target area. The road Dostum would use wound through a narrow valley between two ridgelines, with only a 200-meter stretch where his vehicle would be visible from their position. She would have perhaps 30 seconds from the time his convoy appeared until it disappeared behind a rock formation, 30 seconds to identify the correct vehicle, acquire the target, and make a shot that would determine the success or failure of months of intelligence work. Master Sergeant Clark, positioned with security equipment 50 meters away, checked in over their tactical radio. "Overwatch, this is security. We're picking up normal civilian traffic on the road, but no sign of military or insurgent activity in the area. Local farmers are going about their daily routines, which suggests no enemy presence in the immediate vicinity." The waiting began. In sniper operations, the technical challenge of making the shot often paled in comparison to the psychological challenge of maintaining focus and readiness for hours or even days while waiting for the target to appear. Rebecca settled into a position she could maintain for extended periods, checking and rechecking her equipment while keeping her scope trained on the kill zone. As the morning hours passed, Rebecca found herself thinking about the intelligence analysis that had brought them to this moment. Dostum's emotional attachment to his mother had created the tactical opportunity they needed, but it had also made Rebecca acutely aware of the human cost of what they were doing. She wasn't just eliminating a military target, she was killing someone's son, ending a relationship that had provided comfort and meaning to an elderly woman who would spend the rest of her life wondering why her boy never came home. Her grandfather had warned her about this aspect of sniping during their hunting trips in the Idaho mountains. "Becca," he had said during one of their conversations about the responsibilities that came with deadly skills, "the hardest part isn't making the shot. It's living with the knowledge that you've changed the world permanently, that somewhere there are people who will never understand why their loved one had to die." Washington seemed to sense her contemplation. "Thompson, you okay over there? You're getting that 1,000-yard stare." "I'm fine, Washington. Just running through the shot sequence in my mind." "Good, but remember, when the time comes, don't overthink it. Trust your training and your instincts. You've prepared for this moment your entire career." At 1,430 hours, their radio crackled with an update from Technical Sergeant Gonzalez, who was monitoring communications from a position overlooking the village where Dostum's mother lived. "Overwatch, this is communications. I'm picking up increased radio chatter from the target's security team. Sounds like they're conducting final security sweeps before movement." Rebecca felt her heart rate increase slightly, not from nervousness, but from the focused anticipation that came with knowing the moment of truth was approaching. She began her final equipment checks, ensuring her rifle was properly zeroed, her scope settings were correct for the environmental conditions, and her shooting position was stable and comfortable. "Wind is shifting," Washington reported, studying the movement of grass and dust in the valley below. "Now coming from the west-northwest at 12 to 18 miles per hour. There's also some thermal activity as the afternoon sun heats up the valley floor. You're going to need to account for mirage effects." Rebecca adjusted her scope settings and recalculated her holdover points. At 2,347 meters, even small changes in environmental conditions could cause her bullet to miss by several feet. She had to factor in not just wind and distance, but also air density, humidity, temperature, and the ballistic characteristics of her specific ammunition. At 1,647 hours, Clark's voice came over the radio with increased urgency. "Overwatch. Security. I have a visual of a convoy approaching from the south. 3 vehicles, 2 pickup trucks with mounted weapons, and 1 SUV in the middle. This looks like our target package." Rebecca immediately shifted her focus to the road, scanning through her scope for the first sign of the approaching vehicles. The convoy would be moving at approximately 45 kilometers per hour, giving her very little time to identify Dostum's vehicle and acquire a clear shot. "I have visual," Washington confirmed. "The lead vehicle is passing the first checkpoint now. The target vehicle should be visible in approximately 90 seconds. Rebecca controlled her breathing, settling into the familiar rhythm her grandfather had taught her decades earlier. Her heart rate slowed, her vision seemed to sharpen, and she entered that state of focused calm that separated successful snipers from those who failed under pressure. The first vehicle appeared in her scope, a pickup truck with 3 armed men scanning the surrounding ridgelines for threats. Rebecca let it pass, keeping her crosshairs trained on the point where the middle vehicle would appear. According to their intelligence, Dostum always traveled in the second vehicle, preferring the protection of a lead security element while maintaining the flexibility to escape if the convoy was ambushed. "Target vehicle is now visible," Washington reported. "I can see movement in the passenger compartment, but I can't identify specific individuals from this distance." Rebecca acquired the SUV in her scope, tracking its movement as it navigated the winding road. Through the side windows, she could see the silhouettes of multiple passengers, but the angle and distance made positive target identification nearly impossible. Then something unexpected happened. The convoy slowed significantly as it approached a sharp curve in the road. The lead vehicle had encountered a small herd of goats crossing the roadway, forcing the entire convoy to reduce speed to walking pace. "This is it," Rebecca whispered to herself, realizing that the delay had created exactly the opportunity she needed. Instead of tracking a fast-moving target, she now had a nearly stationary vehicle in her kill zone. Washington was already making calculations. The target vehicle is stopped. The range is 2,347 meters. Wind is 15 miles per hour from the west-northwest. You have a clear shot, but the target is still inside the vehicle. Rebecca kept her scope centered on the SUV, waiting for Dostum to expose himself. Intelligence reports suggested that he was paranoid about remaining inside vehicles for extended periods, preferring to get out and assess situations personally when his convoy was delayed. The wait stretched for nearly 2 minutes, an eternity in tactical terms. Rebecca maintained her shooting position, controlling her breathing and keeping her crosshairs steady while sweat began to bead on her forehead, despite the cool mountain air. Then the passenger door of the SUV opened. A tall man in traditional Afghan clothing stepped out of the vehicle, exactly matching the physical description they had of Abdul Rashid Dostum. He stood next to the vehicle for a moment, surveying the situation with the goats, then began walking toward the lead truck to speak with his security team. "Positive ID on the target," Washington confirmed. "You have a clear shot." Quote, Rebecca placed her crosshairs on Dostum's center mass, made her final calculations for wind and distance, and began the slow squeeze of her trigger. But just as she reached the breaking point of her trigger pull, something happened that no amount of training could have prepared her for. Through her high-powered scope, she saw Dostum pull out a cell phone and make a brief call. When he finished, he smiled, the kind of genuine, warm smile that a man shows when he's spoken to someone he loves. Rebecca realized with absolute certainty that he had just called his mother to let her know he was running late, but would still arrive in time for dinner. The emotional impact hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just a tactical target or a strategic objective. This was a son calling his mother, a human being maintaining family connections despite the chaos of war. For a split second, Rebecca saw Dostum not as an enemy combatant, but as someone's child, someone who was loved and missed and expected home for a family meal. Tears began forming in her eyes, blurring her vision and fogging the inside of her scope. Everything her grandfather had taught her about the humanity of the target, everything Stone had warned her about emotional weakness interfering with mission requirements, converged in that moment of crisis. She had 3 seconds before Dostum would return to his vehicle and disappear behind the rocks. 3 seconds to decide whether her tears were a weakness that would cause mission failure, or a source of strength that would guide her to make the impossible shot. The answer would define not just the mission, but everything she believed about herself as a sniper and as a human being. Time slowed to a crawl as Rebecca Thompson felt the warm moisture gathering behind her scope lens. Through the blur, she could see Abdul Rashid Dostum beginning to turn back toward his vehicle, his phone call to his mother complete. In 2 seconds, he would disappear behind armored glass. In 5 seconds, the convoy would round the bend and vanish from sight. Everything. Months of intelligence work, the safety of coalition forces, the mission that had brought her to this remote Afghan ridgeline, depended on a shot she could no longer see clearly. "Target is moving back to the vehicle," Washington whispered urgently beside her. "You're running out of time." Rebecca's training told her to abort the shot. Every sniper school instructor, every manual, every piece of conventional wisdom emphasized that emotional compromise led to mission failure. But in that crystalline moment of crisis, her grandfather's voice echoed through her consciousness with perfect clarity. "The rifle doesn't care who's pulling the trigger, Becca. It only cares about the skill and heart of the person behind it." Instead of fighting the tears or trying to clear her vision, Rebecca did something that would have seemed impossible to anyone watching. She used her emotional state to enhance her shooting rather than hinder it. The tears, she realized, weren't obscuring her view. They were creating a different kind of clarity. Through the moisture, the harsh glare of the Afghan sun was diffused, reducing the mirage effects that had been distorting her sight picture. The emotional impact of seeing Dostum as a human being hadn't weakened her resolve. It had sharpened her understanding of exactly what this shot meant and why it had to be perfect. Rebecca shifted her focus from the technical mechanics of the shot to something deeper, the intuitive understanding of human movement that her grandfather had taught her to trust. She couldn't see Dostum clearly through her fogged scope, but she could feel his rhythm, predict his movements, anticipate the exact moment when his body would present the optimal target. "1 second," Washington hissed. Rebecca stopped trying to aim with her eyes and began aiming with her heart. Every hunting trip with her grandfather, every lesson about reading wind and terrain, every moment of training that had brought her to this point crystallized into pure instinct. She felt the wind pattern across her face, sensed the bullet's trajectory through space and time, and knew, with absolute certainty, exactly when to fire. The shot broke clean and true, her finger squeezing through the trigger with the smooth precision of someone who had made this same motion 10,000 times before. The recoil drove the rifle stock into her shoulder, but Rebecca was already working the bolt, ready for a follow-up shot if necessary. For 3 eternal seconds, the bullet traveled through the thin mountain air, carrying with it all of Rebecca's training, all of her doubts, and all of her newfound understanding that emotional intelligence wasn't the enemy of tactical precision. It was its most perfect expression. The impact was invisible at that distance, but Washington's excited whisper confirmed what Rebecca already knew in her heart. "Target down! Clean hit! Center mass! The target is down and not moving." Through her scope, Rebecca watched as chaos erupted around the convoy. Security personnel rushed toward the fallen figure. Other vehicles maneuvered to provide cover, and radio chatter exploded across multiple frequencies as Dostum's organization tried to understand what had happened to their leader. But Rebecca felt no elation, no sense of triumph. Instead, she experienced something that no sniper school had prepared her for, a profound understanding of the weight that comes with taking a life, even when that life belonged to someone who had caused immeasurable harm to others. "Confirmed kill," Washington reported over their tactical radio. "Target eliminated. Convoy is in disarray and requesting immediate medical evacuation." Clark's voice crackled back from their security position. "Outstanding shooting. Begin preparation for extraction. We need to clear this area." before enemy reinforcements arrive. As the team began packing their equipment, Washington turned to Rebecca with an expression of professional awe mixed with genuine concern. "Thompson, that was the most incredible shot I've ever witnessed. But I need to ask, are you okay? I saw you struggling with something just before you fired." Rebecca secured her rifle and gathered her gear, taking time to consider her answer carefully. "Washington, I learned something important today. I spent months being told that emotions were a weakness, that real snipers don't feel anything when they pull the trigger. But that's not true. The emotions I felt, seeing Dostum as a human being, understanding the cost of what we were doing, they didn't make me weaker. They made me more precise." Washington listened intently as they began their movement to the extraction point. "When my scope fogged up from the tears, I thought the mission was over," Rebecca continued. "But then I realized that I was trying to make the shot with my eyes instead of with my understanding. My grandfather always taught me that shooting is about more than technical precision. It's about reading the entire situation, understanding human behavior, trusting your instincts." "And the tears?" Rebecca smiled slightly, a complex expression that held both sadness and resolution. "The tears helped me see more clearly than I ever had before. They reminded me that what we do matters, that every shot has consequences, and that understanding those consequences makes us better at our jobs, not worse." The extraction took place without incident, but Rebecca knew that the real impact of her shot would extend far beyond the immediate tactical success. Intelligence reports over the following days confirmed that Dostum's death had created a power vacuum in the Taliban's Eastern Command structure, leading to infighting and disorganization that significantly reduced their operational effectiveness. More importantly for Rebecca, word of her extraordinary shot began to spread through the special operations community. The technical aspects alone, a confirmed kill at 2,347 meters under challenging environmental conditions, would have been enough to establish her reputation. But the circumstances under which she had made the shot, maintaining precision while experiencing intense emotional response, began to change conversations about the role of psychological factors in sniper performance. 3 days after the mission, Captain Mitchell called Rebecca to his office for a formal debrief. Also present was Colonel Sarah Edwards, the Regional Special Operations Commander, who had flown in specifically to discuss the implications of Rebecca's success. "Thompson," Colonel Edwards began, "your shot has generated significant interest at very high levels of command. The distance alone puts you in the record books, but we're more interested in your approach to the psychological aspects of the engagement." Mitchell pulled out Rebecca's after-action report. Thompson reported that she experienced significant emotional response during the final moments of the engagement, including tear formation that compromised her optical sight picture. Yet she was able to complete the mission successfully using what she describes as intuitive targeting methods. Colonel Edwards leaned forward with obvious interest. "Can you explain what you mean by intuitive targeting?" Rebecca chose her words carefully. "Ma'am, I was taught that successful sniping requires more than technical accuracy. It requires understanding human behavior, reading environmental conditions that can't be measured by instruments, and trusting the integration of training with instinct. When my vision was compromised, I relied on my understanding of the target's movement patterns, my feel for wind and trajectory, and my confidence in the fundamentals of marksmanship." Quote, "And the emotional response, how did that affect your performance?" "It enhanced it, ma'am. The emotion reminded me of the gravity of what we do, sharpened my focus on getting it exactly right, and connected me to the human elements of the situation that pure technical analysis might miss." Colonel Edwards exchanged glances with Captain Mitchell. "Thompson, we're developing new training protocols for advanced sniper programs, incorporating psychological preparedness and emotional intelligence alongside traditional marksmanship instruction. Would you be interested in helping develop those programs?" The offer represented everything Rebecca had hoped for, recognition that her approach to sniping wasn't a deviation from proper technique, but an evolution of it. The tears that had fogged her scope weren't a sign of weakness. They were proof that the best snipers were those who could maintain their humanity while performing inhuman tasks. "Yes, ma'am, I'd be honored to contribute to that development." As the meeting concluded, Rebecca thought about Sergeant Stone and the philosophy that had dominated her early deployment. Stone had been wrong about emotions being weak, but he hadn't been malicious. He had simply been operating under an incomplete understanding of what made snipers truly effective. That evening, Rebecca wrote a letter to her grandfather, describing the shot and the lessons she had learned. She told him about the tears, about the moment when she had chosen to trust her heart instead of fighting it, and about the profound accuracy that had emerged from that trust. She also wrote about Dostum's mother, the elderly woman who would never understand why her son failed to arrive for dinner that Friday evening. Rebecca knew she would carry that weight for the rest of her career, and she was grateful for it. The weight reminded her that every shot mattered, that precision was a moral responsibility as much as a technical requirement. The impossible shot had been made not despite her tears, but because of them. In proving that emotional intelligence was a weapon rather than a weakness, Rebecca Thompson had changed not just her own career trajectory, but the entire conversation about what it meant to be a sniper in the modern military. Sometimes the most important victories required not the elimination of feeling, but the courage to feel everything and still perform with perfect precision when lives depended on it. 6 months after the shot that redefined military sniper doctrine, Master Sergeant Rebecca Thompson stood before a classroom of 43 students in the U.S. Army Sniper School in Fort Moore, Georgia. The faces looking back at her represented every branch of the military: Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Marine Force Reconnaissance, Air Force Special Operations, and for the first time in the school's history, 12 of those faces belonged to women. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Rebecca's success with Task Force Reaper had generated reports that climbed through multiple levels of military hierarchy, eventually reaching the offices of senior Pentagon officials who were questioning fundamental assumptions about sniper training and selection. Her 2,347-meter shot had been impressive enough on its own merits, but the circumstances surrounding it, maintaining precision while experiencing intense emotional response, had forced military psychologists and training specialists to reconsider everything they thought they knew about optimal sniper performance. Today we're going to discuss something that wasn't covered in military sniper training until very recently, Rebecca began, walking slowly in front of the classroom. We're going to talk about the role of emotional intelligence in precision shooting, and why the best snipers throughout history have been those who understood how to use their feelings rather than suppress them. Staff Sergeant Marcus Stone sat in the back row of the classroom, having requested to attend Rebecca's lecture during his own advanced instructor training. The months since Santos's death had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his leadership style and his understanding of what made soldiers effective in combat. When he learned that Rebecca was developing revolutionary training methods based on emotional integration, he swallowed his pride and asked to learn from the woman he had once dismissed as too weak for special operations. Rebecca noticed Stone's presence but showed no reaction. Her focus remained on the diverse group of students who would soon deploy to combat zones around the world, carrying with them new approaches to a profession that had remained largely unchanged for decades. Before we begin the practical exercises, Rebecca continued, I want you to understand the philosophical foundation of what we're teaching. Traditional sniper training has emphasized emotional suppression, the idea that feelings interfere with tactical decision-making and mechanical precision. This approach has produced capable snipers, but it has also created artificial limitations on performance and unnecessary psychological trauma for operators who are taught to view their humanity as a professional weakness. She clicked to her first slide, showing brain imaging studies conducted by military researchers over the past year. What we've discovered through both field experience and laboratory analysis is that emotional engagement, properly channeled, actually enhances cognitive performance, improves pattern recognition, and increases accuracy under stress. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, now serving as the Army's lead researcher on advanced sniper techniques, had traveled from Washington, D.C. to observe Rebecca's instruction. Hayes had been instrumental in securing funding for the new training program after Rebecca's success in Afghanistan, and she watched with professional satisfaction as Rebecca explained concepts that were revolutionizing military thinking about psychological preparation for combat. The key insight, Rebecca continued, advancing to a slide showing performance data from recent training exercises, is that emotions provide information that technical analysis alone cannot access. When you feel fear, your subconscious is processing threat indicators that you may not have consciously recognized. When you feel empathy for your target, you're accessing behavioral prediction capabilities that can help you anticipate movement patterns. When you feel the weight of responsibility for your mission, You're connecting with motivational factors that enhance focus and precision. Sergeant First Class Jennifer Martinez, one of the female students in the class, raised her hand. Master Sergeant Thompson, how do you train someone to use emotions constructively when they've been taught their entire career that feelings are weaknesses? Rebecca smiled, recognizing the question she had once asked herself. Martinez, that's exactly the right question, and it gets to the heart of what we're trying to accomplish here. The first step is understanding that there's a difference between being controlled by emotions and using emotions intelligently. She moved to a flip chart and began drawing diagrams showing different psychological states. When emotions control you, they create unpredictable behavior, impaired judgment, and degraded performance. But when you understand emotions as information sources and motivational tools, they become force multipliers that enhance every aspect of your capabilities. Over the following 3 hours, Rebecca guided the class through a series of exercises designed to help students recognize their emotional responses to stress, identify the information those responses contained, and learn to integrate that information into their tactical decision-making processes. The breakthrough exercise involved each student engaging targets while deliberately accessing specific emotional states, protective concern for fellow soldiers, determination to prevent enemy success, even controlled anger at injustice. The results were dramatic. Students who accessed appropriate emotional states consistently showed improved accuracy, faster target acquisition, and better performance under simulated stress conditions. Stone watched the exercises with growing understanding. He had spent his entire career trying to eliminate emotional factors from his decision-making, viewing feelings as sources of error and weakness. But Rebecca's students were demonstrating that emotions, properly understood and channeled, could actually improve performance in measurable ways. During the lunch break, Stone approached Rebecca privately. The conversation he had been avoiding for months could no longer be postponed. Thompson, he began, his voice carrying none of the hostility she remembered from Afghanistan, I owe you an apology that's long overdue. Rebecca set down her notes and gave him her full attention. Stone, you don't need to. Yes, I do, he interrupted. Santos died because I was too stubborn and too prejudiced to listen to intelligence analysis that could have saved his life. I let my assumptions about gender and emotion blind me to capabilities that were right in front of me. Rebecca nodded slowly. Stone, I understand why you thought the way you did. Military culture has taught us for generations that emotions are weaknesses to be overcome. You weren't being malicious. You were following doctrine that we're only now learning to question. Stone looked around the classroom where students were discussing the morning's exercises with obvious enthusiasm. These techniques you're teaching, they work. I've been watching the performance data from your pilot programs, and the improvement statistics are undeniable. Students trained in emotional integration show better accuracy, faster decision-making, and significantly reduced psychological trauma after combat deployments. The trauma reduction is actually the most important finding, Rebecca replied. When snipers are taught to view their emotional responses as professional failures, they develop psychological conflicts that can persist for years after their military service ends. But when they understand emotions as natural and useful responses to extreme situations, they're able to process their experiences more effectively. Stone hesitated before asking his next question. Thompson, would you be willing to work with me on integrating these concepts into the advanced instructor program? I'm scheduled to teach a class of senior NCOs next month, and I think they need to understand these principles. The request represented a complete reversal of their previous relationship, and Rebecca understood the courage it had taken for Stone to make it. I'd be honored to work with you, Stone. These concepts are too important to be limited by personal conflicts or professional pride. That afternoon, Rebecca continued her instruction with advanced exercises in environmental emotion management, techniques for maintaining optimal psychological states, while dealing with extreme weather, extended surveillance periods, and high-stress tactical situations. The final exercise of the day involved each student making precision shots while accessing the specific emotional state that enhanced their individual performance. Some students performed best while channeling protective determination, others while accessing controlled aggression, and still others while maintaining empathetic connection to their role in larger strategic objectives. Sergeant Martinez achieved her personal best accuracy scores while consciously maintaining awareness of the families and communities she was protecting through her precision shooting. Staff Sergeant David Kim, a veteran of multiple deployments, found that acknowledging his grief for fallen comrades actually improved his focus and motivation, rather than distracting from his performance. As the class concluded, Rebecca addressed the fundamental question that had brought her to this moment. You came here believing that snipers don't cry, that the best operators are those who feel nothing when they pull the trigger. What you've learned today is that the opposite is true. The best snipers are those who feel everything: the weight of their responsibility, the importance of their mission, the human cost of their actions, and who use those feelings to enhance their precision rather than compromise it. 3 weeks later, Rebecca received a letter that would stay with her for the rest of her career. It came from Afghanistan, written by Corporal Lisa Chen, one of her former students who had recently deployed with a Special Operations Unit. Master Sergeant Thompson, the letter began, I wanted you to know that the techniques you taught us saved lives yesterday. We were conducting a hostage rescue operation, and I was assigned as the primary sniper for Overwatch. When the moment came to take the shot, I found myself thinking about the hostages' families, about what their capture meant to the people who loved them. Instead of fighting those emotions, I used them exactly the way you taught us. The letter continued with technical details of a successful 1,834-meter shot that had eliminated a terrorist leader holding American aid workers captive. But the most important part came at the end. Master Sergeant, when I made that shot, I was crying. My scope was fogged, my vision was blurred, and I was feeling everything you taught us to embrace rather than suppress. And it was the most accurate shot of my career. The hostages went home to their families because I remembered that snipers who cry are snipers who care enough to be perfect when it matters most. Reading that letter in her office at Fort Moore, Rebecca thought about the journey that had brought her from the mountains of Idaho to this moment of professional vindication. She thought about her grandfather's wisdom, Stone's initial hostility, Santos's preventable death, and the impossible shot that had changed everything. Most importantly, she thought about the hundreds of students who would carry these new concepts into combat zones around the world, armed with the understanding that their humanity wasn't a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be weaponized with precision and purpose. The revolution in sniper training that Rebecca had initiated was spreading beyond the U.S. military. Allied forces were requesting access to the new psychological preparation methods. Military contractors were incorporating emotional intelligence concepts into their training programs, and academic researchers were studying the broader applications of Rebecca's insights for high-stress professions throughout society. But for Rebecca, the most meaningful validation came in simpler forms: letters from former students reporting successful missions, performance statistics showing reduced psychological casualties among snipers trained in emotional integration techniques, and the knowledge that she had fundamentally changed how the military understood the relationship between feeling and fighting. 2 years after her deployment to Afghanistan, Rebecca was promoted to Sergeant Major and assigned to lead the Army's new Advanced Psychological Warfare Training Center. Her mandate was to develop training programs that prepared special operations personnel for the complete spectrum of human experience they would encounter in combat. Not just the technical challenges, but the emotional, psychological, and moral complexities that define modern warfare. On her first day in the new position, Rebecca found a package waiting on her desk. Inside was her grandfather's old hunting rifle, the bolt-action weapon he had used to teach her the fundamentals of shooting during those long-ago trips into the Idaho mountains. Her grandmother had sent it with a note. Samuel always said this rifle belonged to someone who understood that shooting was about more than hitting targets. He would be proud to know that you've taught others to shoot with their hearts, as well as their eyes. That evening, Rebecca took the rifle to the base shooting range and fired a single shot at a target 400 meters away, the same distance where she had first learned to trust her emotions as a source of accuracy rather than error. The bullet struck dead center, just as her grandfather had taught her it would when mind, heart, and skill worked in perfect harmony. As she cleaned the rifle in the fading light, Rebecca reflected on the words that had become her personal motto and the foundation of her revolutionary training methods. They told a simple woman snipers don't cry, but they were wrong. The best snipers cry precisely because they understand that every shot changes the world, and that understanding makes them perfect when perfection is the only acceptable outcome. Quote, the tears that had once fogged her scope in the mountains of Afghanistan had become the foundation for a new understanding of precision, humanity, and the warrior's heart. In proving that emotions were weapons rather than weaknesses, Rebecca Thompson had not only redefined what it meant to be a sniper, she had shown that the most dangerous opponents are often those who are underestimated, misunderstood, and ultimately more human than anyone expected. The impossible shot had become possible not through the elimination of feeling, but through the courage to feel everything and still pull the trigger with perfect precision when lives hung in the balance. And in classrooms around the world, a new generation of warriors was learning that the most lethal snipers are those who never forget that they are, first and always, completely and powerfully human. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.